you're encouraged to take a look and see if there's something you'd like to read or listen to back there at the back. Our thanks goes to the Greenville County Library System for providing this space and sponsoring these events and providing the online link that is broadcasting this live and will be available afterwards through the library website for those who would like to catch up and show the lecture to other folks. So that's all available. The Greenville Chautauqua mailing list, many of you were told about that on your way in, but just in case you're not on the Greenville Chautauqua mailing list, we encourage you to sign up. You will get the reader here every year ahead of time so that you will know as soon as it's printed, so that you'll know what's coming on in the summer, when the programs are, where the programs are, who the program presenters are, and you get all that information in advance. You also get another similar package, except it's in black and white instead of glorious full color, in the winter about our Winter Chautauqua, one of the only Chautauqua organizations in the country that does a Winter Chautauqua. In fact, there's only about a dozen Chautauqua organizations in the country now. So we are considered one of the 2 or 3 most developed, most productive in the entire country. A lot of people have come to us and asked information about their own Chautauquas because this is one of the national models for how to do this. So thank you all for making that possible. Let's see what else I need to say. Tonight, of course, we're going to be exploring the life of labor activist, social reformer, Mother Jones, a name which may be familiar to you, but it's very likely it's not all that familiar to you. We like to include with the famous folks, with the George Washingtons and the Lincolns, and we like to include a few folks that were very significant, very important, but people who are not that often heard of and about. And so in this case, I knew about Mother Jones. I've read the magazine. But you'll find out a lot more about her today. We encourage you to spread the word about our Tuesday talks, spread the word about the festival. Please feel free to take our magazine with you, take extra copies, hand them out to your friends, because friends don't let friends miss Chautauqua. So if you spread the word, it'll be helpful. We've also got some postcards you can send out or hand out. We've got all kinds of little promotional things that you can pass out. It's a free show, and share it with your friends. Tell them how much fun it is. Hopefully everybody here considers it a fun show to come and see. Tonight's speaker is a native South Carolinian. She will be addressing women's roles, particularly Mother Jones, in her activities that made her the most dangerous woman in America. Our presenter is a senior instructor of history at USC Upstate. She has her bachelor's degree in history from the University of South Carolina Upstate. She has her master's in history from the University of South Carolina. She has taught various courses at USC Upstate, addressing issues in world history and focusing on such topics as gender, disability, and eugenics. Her classes include Women in Europe since 1789, Women in the U.S. since 1865, Women and World War II, and, this is my favorite, Unruly Women in the United States. There you go. You're getting applause for that one. Many of her courses engage her students in collecting memories of our past, and as an internship coordinator in history, she oversees from 2 to 8 interns who actively contribute to historical studies. Her research and that research of her students is a major component of contributions to archives such as the Piedmont Historical Preservation Society and the USC Upstate Collection. So, with that said, it is my honor to present to you tonight's speaker, Tammy Pike.
I wasn't sure if this was, is this on? Okay, sorry. I never know if these things work or not. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So I am Tammy Pike, and I do teach a wide variety of courses at USC Upstate. Louder? Okay. Yeah. Is that better? Okay. I do tend to speak a little softly. Either that or I yell at you. It's kind of one or the other. Okay, so I do teach a wide variety of courses at USC Upstate, but my real focus is on the history of women, primarily in the United States. I think that the story of women in the United States is a spectacular story, and it needs to be told, and I enjoy doing that. But tonight, thank you all for showing up and for being here. I appreciate that. I'm sure some of you had other things maybe to do on your Tuesday night, but this is a wonderful showing up of coming here to be here. So tonight I want to talk about a particular woman who I would say a lot of people have no idea who she is, and that's really sad. So Mary Harris, otherwise known as Mother Jones, was probably the greatest labor organizer and activist of the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Without her, most of the strikes that took place would not have actually succeeded. And her place was not being at the forefront of those strikes. She was not the person in leading them, but she was absolutely the organizer, which really made a lot of people in power and a lot of people in authority very angry, because she was so good at organizing and so good at getting people involved. One of my favorite quotes by her, and I've included it on here, is, "Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living." And she truly believed in that. That was, once I tell you a little bit about her, I think you'll understand why. In general, she really did turn strikes from just a budget issue into a moral drama, which is why she was able to make such an impact. She wanted to actually draw the attention of everyone, newspapers, all media. The more that she could make this about dramatics and everyone being involved, the more she knew that she had a greater chance of the actual strikes going the way, her cause. So, with that being said, I want to tell you a little bit about her. So, Mary Harris, we're not quite sure exactly of her date of birth. And the reason for that is because she was born in Ireland and her family immigrated to Canada. In her autobiography, she actually changes the date of her birth, so we're really unsure when she was born. But she kind of writes that narrative, if you will. But she was baptized on August the 1st of 1837. So if you want to take that as a roundabout, yeah, we'll take that. So one of the things that affects her very greatly is when her family immigrates from Canada, from Ireland to Canada, her family is very much so discriminated against. So they're not just immigrants, right? They're Irish. And the Irish were heavily discriminated against. They were seen as the dirtiest of Europeans. No one actually liked them. That was in Canada and the United States. They were not well received. And they were Catholic. So she had the trifecta going. And so they were heavily discriminated against. So she decides she wants out of this environment. She wants out of Canada. How can she do this? She does this by going to school, and she eventually is going to enroll in what's referred to as the Toronto Normal School. It's basically a school for creating teachers. And that's what she does. So she becomes a teacher. And then she is going to move. So she leaves Canada, and she's going to obtain a job in Chicago. And from there, this is when it kind of gets a little interesting. She goes from Chicago to Memphis, Tennessee. I don't know why. She doesn't really state why. It's just the way she travels. And when she gets to Memphis, she's no longer a teacher. She's involved in the dressmaking business. Parts of her life are a little interesting in the decisions that she makes. So this is 1861, and it's probably the highlight of her life because she meets her husband, and her husband's name is George Jones. You can't make this stuff up. And so they get married. George Jones in Memphis is a member and an organizer of a particular national union. It's a union of iron molders, which this is her first real interaction with unions. Her husband, in interacting with that union, he's not just a member, he is really involved. He's an organizer. This is a major part of his life, which becomes a major part of her life. Over the next 5 years, she's going to end up having 4 children, 3 girls, 1 boy. And unfortunately, very unfortunately, by the time we get to 1867, there's going to be an epidemic of yellow fever. And when it hits her home in the most tragic way. So not only does she lose her husband, but she loses all 4 of her children, who are all under the age of 5. I can't imagine. I don't think any of us could really imagine that. In just one fell swoop, your entire life is gone. What do you do? What possible reality do you face after this? So she decides not to stay in Memphis. She is actually going to go back to Chicago, where she's going to open up a dressmaking shop. And she does pretty well for herself at this dressmaking shop. She also is going to ultimately become involved with other business owners. Unfortunately, I keep saying that. I'll come back to that in a moment. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire is going to destroy her home and her shop and most of Chicago. However, she decides to stay and help rebuild Chicago, help rebuild her dressmaking shop. And I think this is where she becomes involved in a union known as the Knights of Labor. It's one of the biggest unions in the United States at the time, because she understands the power that the unions actually have. To be able to organize, to be able to picket, to be able to do all of these things. It's at this moment that she makes this stand. So it's almost out of the fire, she emerges. And by joining the union, she becomes something different. She's no longer just Mary Harris. She has a new personality. Or sometimes, as I like to say, she has a new character. Because she doesn't really like the old one so much anymore. I think I can understand why. If you are familiar with her at all, this is around the time when she begins to adopt the idea of, or the personality of, Mother Jones. And I like this image because this is what she will look like. She will dress in really outdated black clothing that was kind of heavy and really just sort of hung on her. And she will refer to the male workers, especially the male strikers, as her boys. It's almost as if they're her children. And so they begin to refer to her as Mother Jones. So she has taken on this personality that will last the entirety of her life. It's also at this point when she begins to actually organizing strikes. So Chicago is not the only place that strikes occur, so you have to go to where strikes are happening. Or you have to be invited to where they are. The union that she is most associated with is called the United Mine Workers, or the UMW. That's mainly the union that she's most associated with and the one that she repeatedly is open to helping. She's usually seen in picketing lines, encouraging strikers, striking workers to stay on strike, even when management brings in strike breakers. So I'll give you a direct quote from her. She believed that working men deserved a wage that would allow women to stay home to care for their kids, unquote. She has a very traditional view of men and the family. She believed that men should be able to work in the mills and the mines, and that the women should be able to stay home and take care of the family. And she argues that repeatedly. That was her view of the situation. So in 1902, she is actually going to be brought to Pennsylvania, and in 2 separate months, once in February and once actually in September. Her goal was to try to find some type of unity among the striking workers. So the issue in Pennsylvania was that there was a couple of different strikes happening at different places. Unfortunately for her, she's going to try to do a lot of different things. So she's rallying around better wages. That's one of the things. I would say the thing that she really capitalizes on is that she specialized in organizing and motivating the wives of strikers to participate in protests, which would increase the effectiveness of the strike itself. She actually, in this particular strike, she encouraged the wives to organize in groups, and they would wield brooms, they would beat on tin pans, and they would shout, "Join the union." So she understood that you needed to mobilize the women to be able to make the strike more effective, but that the women didn't need to be involved in the work. She kept those things separate. In this particular strike, she also had what was called the broom and mop brigades, where she encouraged women to march, to make noise, to ultimately intimidate strike breakers, which were referred to as scabs, to basically prevent them from entering the mines so that the strike was effective, right? She believed that these women, the wives, by doing this provided a peaceful barrier between the strikers and the mine owners, because she believed mine owners would not send paid militias to attack women. And for the most part, she was right. They wouldn't attack these women who were protesting. They would attack the men, but not really the women. This is that whole drama. In 1912 and 1913, in Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, West Virginia, she's going to find herself actually under arrest. In these particular strikes, she kind of walks into a really deadly situation. Literally, the strikers and the mine owners' militias are shooting at each other. And she walked right into that. So martial law is declared twice in this area. She is ultimately put under arrest, and she is put on trial. Basically, she's put under a court-martial. She doesn't believe that the court-martial has any legitimacy, which doesn't help her case. She's being charged with attempted murder and a couple of other crimes, none of which she actually had any association with, but she is sentenced to 20 years and in the state penitentiary. She actually ends up, quite frankly, at a boarding house where she serves 85 days. It's I wouldn't want to go to the penitentiary either, but, so why is she released? She's released because it coincides with a Senate investigation that is taking place, and they are looking into the conditions of the local coal mines. And this happens under the Senator of John Kearns. Now, this particular investigation continues, and it continues until it is scrutinized so much that ultimately every time the state tries to silence her, they really just kind of enlarge her fame. They just make her more dramatic. And by 1924, she's actually meeting with President Calvin Coolidge, talking about what's going on in the coal mines. This will not be the only president she talks with. She understood the effect of drama. So those 85 days for her were absolutely 85 days she would serve again. It was the impact that she needed to make. It wasn't just, well, I was in jail for 85 days. This is what she needed to do to bring attention to the cause. The 1913-1914 Colorado coalfield strike is also a strike that is quite fascinating. By the time she arrives at this particular strike, she is also going to find herself in a position of dealing with the United Mine Workers of America against basically the Rockefeller-owned Colorado Fuel Company. So she's dealing with a major, major family and a major corporation. Once again, she's arrested. She does serve time in prison. And then she's escorted out of the state of Colorado. Prior to what is referred to as the Ludlow Massacre. So if you see this image here, this was the Ludlow tent colony. So strikers lived in these tents with their families. So what happens? What happens is ultimately National Guardsmen are going to come into this particular area. They're going to open fire, and they end up killing 20 people. The majority of them were women and children. This is going to sound a little awful, but this actually works to the cause for Mother Jones. Because what it does, this makes the news. This makes the national news. You've just massacred 20 women and children. So, after the massacre, she's actually invited to meet the owner of the mine, which was John D. Rockefeller, Jr. And apparently, it goes really well. And it's believed that their meeting, she's partially responsible for convincing him to actually go to the mines. Why don't you go see the mines? Go see what your workers are experiencing. And he does. And because of that, he is going to begin to introduce long-sought reforms within the mines. So she actually has a direct impact here in this moment. The miners refer to her as the miner's angel because they believe that she had power to affect change that much. If only. So, in 1901, she actually is going to arrive in Philadelphia because in Philadelphia, in the mills, 100,000 workers, 16,000 of them were children, are going to go on strike. According to the 1900 census, 1/6 of all American children under the age of 16 were employed. She makes this claim, that the girls that are working in these mills and in these mines were being robbed and demoralized. She makes some other claims too, but we'll leave that there. She also states this. She felt that the rich, the people that own the mills and the mines, she felt that they were using these children to work in the mines and the mills versus letting them attend schools. And by working them in the mills, they would end up paying for the mill owner and the mine owner's children's college tuition. She's not wrong. It's more of a, not a quite direct link, but there's a link there. So she travels to different mills in New Jersey to see if the same situation is occurring there. And she finds in New Jersey the situation is not the same, that they don't employ as many children. And I'll read a quote from her. She states that the child labor law is better enforced for one thing, and there are more men at work than in the mills here, meaning in Philadelphia. So what she's trying to say is they actually enforce their child labor laws, and there are more men working. So that means the children don't have to work. Unfortunately, the mill owner does make a good rebuttal, which is they claim that if the workers go on a wage scale, then they would not be able to do business while paying adult wages, and that they would be forced to close. That's their rebuttal. Jones is in a tight spot here, so she encourages the workers to accept the deal. This is one of the few times in which she capitulates, asks them to accept the deal. But she doesn't forget about child labor. In fact, she's going to bring national attention to it. She wants to abolish child labor. So she organizes children working in mills and mines to participate in what's called the, excuse me, the March of the Mill Children. So roughly they're going to walk about 124 miles from Philadelphia to ultimately President Theodore Roosevelt's summer house, which is in New York. She wants to take them directly to his summer house. And that's really what they do. They have banners that they are actually waving to say things like, "We want to go to school and not the mines," which is pretty effective. Along the way, they have rallies each night in different cities with music and speeches which draw thousands of citizens. So she's being very effective at using all of this drama. In the image here, this is the beginning of the actual march. She's in the center. And on this sign over here, you see in English, a child is wearing a stole that basically says, "Abolish slavery," which is what they feel like they're in. They don't feel like they're working for a fair wage. They feel like they are enslaved in this system. This particular trek got a lot of attention. So, when approaching Mother Jones, I believe that her method was ultimately sermon, strategy, and theater. That's how she operated. She didn't really simply speak for the workers. She staged labor conflict in a way that the wider public would have to watch it, like the march. And one of the ways she did this was through moral language. So wages weren't just simply a question of exploitation. They need to be paid better. They need to work less hours, right? It becomes more about the dignity of the person. And in reality, it also becomes about, is this person not as valuable as the actual owner himself? She uses that moral language to truly make those arguments. Family organizing is where she is best. She understands that when you mobilize the miners' wives and children alongside the men on the strike, this is just gold, right? Like in the Pennsylvania strike, she would have them play key roles, such as they would wheel brooms, they would, beat on tin pans. She had this belief that because women were nurturers and motivators, that they could keep the strike going. They could provide, at key moments, they could provide that extra moral support for the men when things were truly dark, when you needed to be reminded who you were truly fighting for, when you're fighting for your wife and you're fighting for your children. And if they were right there with you, then you would fight just a little bit more and just a little harder. In terms of public drama, her speeches, her marches, her arrests, her headlines were just part of the tactic. So she was termed the most dangerous woman in America. And she was termed this by a West Virginian district attorney by the name of Reese Blizzard in 1902, when at her trial for ignoring an injunction banning meetings by striking minors. She really was the most dangerous woman in America at the time. Even though in this image she is sitting at a desk and she doesn't look like it. So I think the interesting question is, why does she still matter? Maybe a better question is, why does no one know who she is? She remained an organizer until the 1920s, and she continued to speak on behalf of the unions until her death. She is buried in the Union Miners Cemetery in Mount Olive, Illinois, alongside miners who died in 1898 in the Battle of Verdun. She is buried alongside miners. She called these particular miners who were killed in strike-related violence her boys. And in 1932, about 15,000 of them are actually going to protest against the United Mine Workers, which was the organization that she fought so hard for. It is interesting because they were convinced that they had acted in the spirit of Mother Jones and that she would have supported their strike. So they decide that they're going to place a proper headstone on her grave. And by 1936, they had raised $16,000. They were able to purchase 80 tons of Minnesota pink granite with bronze statues of 2 miners flanking a 20-foot shaft and a bas relief of Mother Joan at its center. She mattered to the miners, and she mattered to the cause. She still matters. In the 1970s, a magazine was created called Mother Jones. It's not exactly I don't think she would have approved of it, but it was the largest selling radical magazine of the decade. But, I just kind of think that we'll leave that there. In 1984, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. During the 89 to 90 piston coal strike in Virginia, West Virginia and Kentucky, I think that she would have really liked this. The wives and daughters of the striking coal miners, inspired by still surviving tales of Mother Jones, dubbed themselves the Daughters of Mother Jones and stood by their husbands on strike and protest. And in 2019, This is like the cherry on top. She was inducted into the National Mining Hall of Fame. And she never mined a day in her life. She never held office, but she made power answer anyway. Thank you.
The part of our program where you have a chance to ask additional questions, things you would like to know about Mother Jones or whatever comes to mind. So just raise your hand. Here we go. And I will come over with a microphone. We've got 2 questions right over here. And I'll pass this to the first hand I saw up.
So her gainful employment, okay, her gainful employment was with the miners for a period of time, and then after that, she became a paid organizer by various unions? Because how would she have access to, like, in the next one where it talks about the children, where she did a march of the children, she would have to be, how would you get access into a company if you didn't have a connection to within the company? Is that not correct?
Right. So when you think about her in these respect, when she, it's weird to think invited, but when she is invited into, like when she was invited into Pennsylvania, she was invited into Pennsylvania to basically to be part of the strike. The union basically will pay. Yeah. I think a nicer way of maybe seeing this is that she is a paid activist. And so instead of maybe a paid member of a union, because that's not really how it always worked. I think she was more so a paid activist than she really was a paid unionist.
And a question right in front.
Sure.
Who paid her was going to be my first question. But I also am curious that though she was obviously a woman and doing very important work and using the families, the women's, and the children for men who were doing the work, it would be interesting to me to superimpose her methods on some of the other industries that exploited children, like the mills in this part of the country, where children really were important parts of the industry. Mm-hmm. Though there were certainly boy children in the mines, for the most part, it was the men who were working, underpaid, bad conditions, all of that. But there were other industries that really abused the women and paid them less. And that's why they employed the women.
Right. So in her, she doesn't really address any of this in her autobiography because, like I said, maybe not quite as bluntly, she writes her own narrative. She only addresses her own story in the way that she wants to. I would say that when she's invited or called to a particular place and paid as an activist, she's not, I don't think that she wasn't invited to anywhere in the South. I don't think that her methods would have been as effective or appreciated here. Just because there were other movements in the North that were kind of similar to what she was doing, but there wasn't the same movements in the South. So I do think that she had some of that going for her, especially Pennsylvania and, right. But you wouldn't have seen that in the South. So.
Okay, other questions? Yes, right here in front. And you've got, well, let's go over to that side and then we'll come over to this side.
Do you think that her age had anything to do with the influence she had? The fact that she was this old woman doing this, did that help too, do you think?
I think the fact that she made herself look much older, she wasn't actually, she presented herself as being much older than she actually was. And that is definitely what helped. She had this almost grandmotherly figure. There was someone on the Senate floor once said that that she was like a mother alligator. And she said, I hope I live long enough to be a grandmother alligator. And I think that she really was more of a grandmother kind of figure. And so she didn't seem to be very terrifying. She seemed to be more just, she didn't exude any kind of,
Maybe the word is matronly.
yeah. She was very matronly. And I think the fact that she drew in the women and the children absolutely helped her. Because she didn't seem to be causing any kind of waves or any kind of, well, she was, but any kind of dissidence in that particular way. I think that was probably her biggest asset, was making herself look older than she was.
Okay, and a question over here to your left in the front.
I think, thank you for taking my question. I see where she was also influential in the organizing the shirtwaist workers. Can you elaborate on that?
So she was in the Chicago area. And in other areas where most, especially in Chicago, New York, and in the northern areas. And she was pretty good at organizing a lot of the shirtwaist workers, especially after the Chicago fire. Not the Chicago fire that killed them, but the Chicago fire of 1871. She was a dressmaker also, so you had that. But she tended to try to be involved in businesses that had women and children, and especially young girls. So it fits with her, especially early on in her career. Ultimately, there's not a lot of success there. It doesn't pan out well for the shirtwaist girls.
Okay, other questions? Oh, yes, in the back.
Oh. Would you remind me what the name of the 1990 strike was? And at that point, were there women also who were striking and part of the labor force in that strike?
Are you talking about the one in when you say 1990?
Yeah, you mentioned that in the follow-up, the effects of her lingering through history.
Yeah, so the 1989 to 1990, that was the Pittston coal strike in Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Can you restate your question now?
Yes, at that point, were there women mine workers too who were involved?
Not that I'm aware of, but to be honest, I'll be 100% honest with you, I don't think so, but I could be wrong on that. I'm more focused on the wives and the children, but there could have been, it's possible, but I don't want to say 100% that it's a no, because I just don't 100% know. I'm never going to say yes or no if I don't know 100%.
Okay. Did any of George Jones's siblings or Mother Jones's siblings get involved in the union or labor movements, and any of their descendants down the way?
I don't know about George Jones. And for Mary Jones, not to the extent that she did. I think that there were key moments in her life that made her become involved, right? So there's no one that I can think of that pursued it like she did. Here and there, some, but not like this.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, right over here.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say she was an early inventor of a spin doctor and a social media influencer. I'm super proud of her. So it mentions that her father was an activist. I'm interested to know if her mother was, and also I didn't catch the children that perished. Were they male or female, or were they both? I'm wondering if that might be why she was so invested in the female children's slavery. And thank you.
So I'll address the mother. Her father was an activist. Her mother was more of a supporter of her father. At the time, I don't discount the mother's activism, but it would be in support of the father's activism. So if he was doing it, she would be in supporting of it. It was not that she was directly out doing her own activism. That was sort of par for the course for a lot of wives. So it's not like she was out doing her own activism over here. Any activism that he was doing, she would have maybe been involved in, and did sometimes. In terms of the children, they had 3 girls and 1 boy. All of them were under the age of 5. And I think that if you take, and with her husband dying, I think if you take that one situation, I do not think that that would have been the cause to put her into becoming Mother Jones. I think it takes that paired with the Chicago fire. It has to be both. Because the Chicago fire literally wipes out everything, and she has to rebuild it again. And because of that, she ends up joining the Knights of Labor, which the Knights of Labor also had a women's union too. And I think it's these 2 events that especially because Her children die in 1867. The fire happened in 1871. I mean, come on, give somebody a break. I mean,
Okay, other questions? Before we say goodbye to our presenter, I have a question for you. This is something we on the Chautauqua board are discussing. We have our Tuesday evening sessions, which during the winter, it gets very dark by 7 o'clock. And we have heard from several people who come to our meetings that that becomes a problem as the winter comes on. And we're just doing a straw poll here. During the winter months, if we could arrange as a practice, as a test to see how well it would go, if we could arrange a Tuesday talk on a Sunday afternoon here where we don't have any competition from the theater next door, how many folks would be interested in coming to a 2 o'clock or a 3 o'clock presentation like tonight on a Sunday during the winter months? Just a show of hands for those who might be interested. Okay, quite a few. All right, just checking. That was just a straw poll. All right, and one more call. Anybody have a question about Mother Jones? Or yes, here we go. Just call it out from there. Go ahead, just call it out.
So mine's more not exactly on Mother Jones, but on the difference between. So you saw like the children calling out like their labor as a type of systematic slavery. You saw not necessarily this one.
As you start to answer that, can I jump in quickly?
No, you-
From Charles Dickens' point of view? Charles Dickens talks a lot about that in his 2 trips to America. And the first thing he wanted to do was to find all these children workers, because, he wrote about it in his books, how badly the children were treated. And when he was in Massachusetts, he discovered that there was a program in one city in Massachusetts where the children were treated well, paid well, encouraged to read and get educated, and by the time they were teenagers, they had saved enough, part of their salary was set aside, so they would have the funds to start their own life with enough money to start a household and all that, and it was women that were the focus. And he was very laudatory of that program in one town, in one state. Everywhere else, it was not like that. Everywhere else, south and north. And he didn't get very far into the south because he could not stand what he saw with the brutality of slavery. It made him sick, and he had to leave. He canceled his trip to Charleston because he said if he couldn't take Northern Virginia, there's no way he's going to be able to stand for South Carolina. So that is actually parents sending their kids to work in the mines is a Southern thing, but it was also a Northern thing as well. Yeah. I just mentioned that just because of Charles Dickens. Okay.
Since you could ask a question, I'm going to ask a question. I read in the little pamphlet that we handed out to everyone that she had a 100th birthday party. But if they're not really sure, do you think that was part of her theater to have a 100th birthday party so people would have sympathy for her and say, oh, come on, this lady's 100 years old. We need to, we need to listen to her.
I think that this is more of a psychological question that I can try to answer. I think that it was definitely dramatic and theatric, but I also think that ultimately she didn't want to not matter. So I think that, having a 100th birthday party would have been something that, first and foremost, she's 100, why not?
But if her birthday was in 37, but she claimed it was so she would be 93 when she had her 100th birthday party, but she still gets the party. And probably I'm not going to see a 100th birthday party, so,
Yes, like I said, it's more of a psychological question. Why do you do this? Because she can. I think that it's just that she can get away with it. Why not?
You said that she was baptized in 1837. And in the England at that time, I know, they baptized them immediately because they might die, and they needed to be baptized before they died. So more than likely, it was the same way in Ireland, so I suspect she was born in 1837.
I suspect probably 2, and I suspect that if you were able to truly, so she was born in Cork, Ireland, and if you find that exact church, you have to be able to find those records because they kept, church records are incredible, right? But I think that she also did not want to claim anything about that particular part of her life. And it's her autobiography, so she changed. She did what she wanted. I mean, in essence, I think it's very fascinating that you can, at the time period, during that time period, that you could just say, I was born here this time, I did this, I did that. And even when you're given like actual proof, which she was plenty of times, she just refuted it. It doesn't alter any of the things she did.
Larry, I got it.
But you know,
This is sparking a conversation. I was just going to say, my mom was born in Ireland in 1905, and they were never sure what their exact birthday was. It was when the priest got around
to it.
the barn, that was their birthday.
The records were kept in the church.
Yeah.
They weren't kept in any governmental
Yeah.
place.
And it is true that you could be baptized I mean, I am very familiar with baptism records of individuals that were baptized a year later, that were baptized days later, and that becomes their birthday. So, well, if it's not correct according to the baptism records, why can't she change it? I'm not arguing that she should have. I'm just saying that, you know.
She also proved herself able to reinvent herself.
Yes.
She lost her family, and she lost her business, and she was still able to reinvent herself. So finding a birthday that's convenient, that seems like small potatoes on top of everything else.
You know, I agree with you, but absolutely, there were reporters throughout her life that was their, I mean, that was it for them. You're going to acknowledge that was not your birthday, that you're not this age, and she didn't care.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
A reminder to check your programs. We will be having additional programs here. The next, I think we have 2 more programs before the series is over, including a makeup program for Edgar Allan Poe. So, because that one we missed because of the weather. And so we will be doing that one. And it's listed, I believe, in there as well. What's the date on the,
Yes. Very much so.
is May 19th?
Intent on improving the men's
Okay.
working status so that they could keep the women home, to keep their children.
Rebecca Mott, May the 5th. Edgar Allan Poe, May the
Yes.
19th.
When she
Okay.
got married, her husband made enough money
you.